Hi everyone, it's the 2nd of August 2026, and with today's video I wanted to discuss the US-Cuba relations. For the last few videos and ever since the beginning of the year, specifically February 28th, most of the focus of US foreign policy has been on the US-Iran conflict and the Strait of Hormuz specifically. This is because of the global impact it has with the price of energy, fertilizer, oil, and hydrogen and helium coming out of the Gulf. So today I actually wanted to focus on US-Cuba relations because it's important to remember that the national security doctrine released by the United States in the Trump administration, I believe it was in 2025, prioritized a Western Hemisphere first outlook. They referred to it as the Monroe Doctrine 2.0 or the Donroe Doctrine, which is full spectrum dominance over the Western Hemisphere from the tip of Greenland all the way down to the bottom of Chile. The software I'm using on the map to visualize all of this is called MapBoard. It's written up here in the top left-hand corner. It's a free to download map drawing program, and you can edit the map however you like. You can color it in, and you can also link to different news articles. As you can see on the right hand side, I've got RSS feeds plugged into the program, as well as markets and LLMs. So the way the program works is it takes every object on the map, whether that be a country or a flag, an item, an emoji, a text box, as you can see here on the left-hand side. I've got US-Cuba relations, text, units, 3-dimensional units, 2-dimensional units, naval units, all different sizes and colors, and flags. And you'll see I've got the amphibious American ship here and an American destroyer to represent what's going on in the Southern Command region, in specifically the Western Hemisphere. And all of this is represented as JSON objects. On the right-hand side, you'll see the JSON objects with many different properties, whether it be a ship or the country of Brazil. You can add notes and different custom properties. And when you save this as a JSON, you can plug it into the LLM and you can get all different types of queries and response JSONs that can plug back into the map. So it's the perfect software for map visualization, representation, whether you're a content creator, an analyst, or someone who's a hobbyist and an educator even, to present to a group of students. So it's called MapBoard. I've got the link in the description below. It's a free program for you to use and download on Windows. So you can go ahead and find that there. Okay, US-Cuba relations. So like most people, I've been focusing this year on the Russia-Ukraine war and primarily the US-Iran war. If I go over here and drag the map over to the Strait of Hormuz, just showing a little bit of functionality, I can color Iran red, Saudi Arabia blue, Turkey green, and this has been the primary focus for the last 6 months because we are heading into the 6th month of the war, and it's drained all our time. It's taken all our time, rightly so. It's very important for the global economy, but I thought today it would be very important to focus on the US-Cuba relations, given the pressure campaign that the Trump administration has taken in his second administration. And this was beginning in 2025, that the president and his administration has taken this turn from the Biden administration. People believe that typically this is very personal to a very senior member of the Trump administration, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Secretary Marco Rubio, because he is of Cuban descent, of Cuban origin, and an anti-communist. At least that's what has been portrayed from what I've read in the media. So this is what we're focusing on today, is Cuba and the policies that the United States is taking against Cuba. Like everyone else, well, not everyone, but most people, like I said, I have been focused on the Strait of Hormuz, so I'm a little lacking in the knowledge of US-Cuba relations as of 2025 and 2026. So what I want to do today is go through the LLM, take the context of the MapBoard, and learn and show how this software can be used as a learning program and a learning base, a foundation for teaching yourself or teaching a group of others in the different events and different assets, routes, resources, and strategies according to the map display. Okay, so prior to the current US embargo and pressure campaign on Cuba, as of 2025-2026, the main event was the Venezuela operation by the United States. It was the capture of the Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro. And this was widely perceived, and I believe so as well, that this was a flawless operation. This really shocked the world in a good way. The United States was able to swiftly go in a matter of 2 to 3 hours, capture the leader of a foreign government, and escort him back to the United States as a prisoner. For many, many months, the United States, as you can see on the map, had a presence in the region with their direct warships. They were shutting down different drug routes and illicit contraband routes that the Venezuelans were taking in order to fund their criminal empire and therefore their regime. I'll go ahead and represent this. As you can see on the top panel, I've got the draw button here. I've got the draw selected, and I will just draw a conflict zone, 25% fill around the Venezuela coastline here. And this can represent, if I bring in an emoji, represent that's a bit big. Go ahead and make that small. Represent a conflict zone in the particular region. So once again, this software is very good for representing different states of the map and what's going on. Okay, so in order to get a full understanding and a chronological understanding of what's going on in the US-Cuban relations, I wanted to use the LLM to take the current context of the map with the highlighted countries, the flags, and the destroyers, the different military assets. And I wanted to feed it to the LLM, and with the expectation that the LLM would return a JSON array of different objects of different levels of importance to present and plot on the map so we can learn what the process was in order to get to where we are with the Cuba-US relations. So if I go onto the right-hand side and I select LLM and I select prompt, what I want to say is I'm writing here in the prompt bar, I've selected my OpenAI model, my GPT-5.6 Terra, and I will select web search. And by the way, it is taking the API key that I have as a desktop environment variable. So my prompt is, I'd like to learn more about the US-Cuba relations as of the second Trump administration. Please present and plot in chronological order the US admin's policies, operations, and different pressure campaigns that they've placed on the country of Cuba. Okay. I'd like to learn more about the US-Cuba relations as of the second Trump administration. Please present and plot in chronological order the US admin's policies, operations, and different pressure campaigns that they've placed on the country of Cuba. I'll also add, it is widely reported that the US would like to see regime change and a pivot away from China for the country of Cuba. And I'll just reiterate what I want the LLM to do. I want it to plot in detail these events on the map. And I'll click generate. And what I'm expecting this to provide is an array of detailed JSON objects or different items that can be easily imported into the map as you see it today. So I've got many different objects on the map already. Remember, each country is an object, and it is noted in the object's properties if a country is colored a different color, if it has a flag, if there are different notes and different icons on the map. So it is taking each country's context as its own individual object, as well as different assets on the map: destroyers, amphibious ships, choke points, conflict circles, emojis, flags, and text. So a very powerful tool to use the LLM as a learning, well, in this particular video, as a learning and visualization tool, and to get that representation on the map. So here I've gotten my response, my JSON response. As you can see, it is an array, a response JSON. Down the bottom, for those people that are concerned about their token economy, you can see sessions, the session tokens used. I've used 31,000 session tokens, and that is the accumulation of the preview, the context of the MapBoard as it is existed before the prompt. It is the prompt itself, which was sent up here in the text box, and it is the response JSON all accumulated in one. And that's represented down here on the bottom for your reference. Okay, so here's the response, and I'm going to go ahead and import that into the map. So pay close attention to the map. At the moment, we've got our 2 US ships, we've got our countries colored and the different maps on the MapBoard. I'm going to hit apply to map, and we should see many different objects arrive on the map from the LLM prompt. Great. As you can see here, we've got different notes, different warning signs that have a latitude and longitude as it relates to the US-Cuba relations. I'd like to increase the size of the name of Cuba. So we'll just go ahead in the JSON and adjust the name size. And we'll go one by one to understand what is actually going on, because this video is an education video for all of us that haven't been focused too much on the US-Cuba relations and have been more focused on the US-Iran situation. The color-coded different points, nodes on the map, as you can see, there are different shapes: hexagon, yellow, green circle up here. Different, we've got diamonds, red diamonds up in the United States, looks like the capital. And down in Cuba, we've got the plotted campaign. This is a white square. Interestingly enough, here in Mexico, we've got a dashed line over to Mexico. Maybe this is a supply route. We'll go in and explore what's going on here. And we've got a node here in Mexico as well. This is the first month, the 29th day of the first month in 2026. This is a secondary tariff threat. And as you can see on the right-hand side in the text, we've got an executive order 14380 declared a national emergency and created a process for additional US tariffs on imports from countries determined to directly or indirectly provide oil to Cuba. CRS identified Mexico as a major 2025 supplier. The order authorizes rather than automatically imposes tariffs. So that's giving the President of the United States the option and the ability through the executive order to apply those secondary tariffs if he feels that's necessary. And that trade route here, so the Mexican government, the state of Mexico, has been accused by the United States of supplying Cuba with resources through this route represented by a dashed line here on the map. I'll just zoom out for context so you can see what's going on to get the full context. We also recognize that going down to Venezuela, there is another dashed line representing a supply route. So if we zoom into the red diamond here on the Venezuela map and click that, we can see this is a 2026 oil lifeline targeted. And remember, these objects on the map that have been imported, these are realistic latitude and longitude specific designations. The text reads, the administration, wider Cuba pressure campaign treated external oil supply as a leverage point. CRS reported Venezuela had long been Cuba's primary supplier, and that Cuban oil imports from Venezuela were halted in January 2026. So this is the coalescing of the United States' Venezuelan campaign with the Cuba campaign. The Venezuelan government, the terrorist Maduro government that it has now collapsed since he was taken by the United States, was supplying Cuba with oil because Cuba, it has been reported in the news, is desperately in need of oil for their energy and their domestic transportation base. So that supply line, that route, has been represented by a dashed line all the way to Venezuela. So you're seeing how the AI, together with the current context of the map, can plot clearly a visual representation of the geopolitical and geoeconomic events going on at any given time. This can also be done not only for current events, but this can be used for historical events as well. You could plot the US Civil War. You could plot the US-Mexico War. You could even plot the US War of Independence in 1776. There is, as long as the map clearly represents with the appropriate context what it is you want, the sky's the limit as far as different types of analysis and presentations that you're capable of giving. So if we scroll down here on Havana, we'll notice many different nodes. We'll start with the white node. This has been titled Scope of Plotted Campaign. And we'll read the text. The source, we've got a source down here in the JSON. This is from the White House. The text reads, the mapped measures are sanctions, travel remittance controls, litigation exposure, visa restrictions, diplomatic designations, and secondary economic pressure. The official documents reviewed do not identify a U.S. kinetic military operation against Cuba. And this has been categorized as intel. So the United States, through its geoeconomic policy, uses financial sanctions, both direct and indirect, that is secondary financial sanctions on trading partners for a particular country and companies, but for a particular country like Cuba, before it seeks a military solution to the problem. And that is what the United States is doing with the country of Cuba. It is strangling the Cuban regime, the communist Cuban regime, with financial sanctions before, and trying to put pressure on Cuba to come to the negotiating table to solve the situation peacefully, rather than having to send in military assets into the region. Okay, let's look further. So that white dot represented the financial sanctions by the United States on Cuba. Let's look and inspect the yellow note here, the yellow node on the map. You can see it has tooltips when you hover over. By the way, just a reminder, this is the MapBoard software. It's free. The link is in the download. The download link is in the description below the video. Okay, so the yellow node is targeted right sanctions. This is from 2021. So this is actually in the Biden administration. After July 2021 protests, the Biden administration sanctioned Cuba security entities and officials and imposed visa restrictions over repression. So an interesting response there from the Biden administration. You'll note that in the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, in Biden's last days, I do believe the Biden administration did ease some sort of sanctions or designations of the country of Cuba. So a bit of a yo-yo process. We know that the Obama administration, a prior Democratic administration, was a little bit more accommodating to the country of Cuba, and that the general pattern has been that the Republicans have been much more hawkish on the country of Cuba. Different nodes here, moving on. We've got from earlier administration, this might be from the Trump administration in 2020, a Cuba prohibited accommodations list barred US travelers from using listed properties tied to the Cuban government, military, or security services. So as you can see, and this is 2020, this is September, and this is from the State Department, as you can see, the United States has been really waging this war, not only for 50, 60, 70 years in the past since the Soviet Union, but has been continuing changing and adjusting its policy towards Cuba as what would seem from an outsider's perspective to be a push-pull between the Democrats, the US Democrats, and the Republicans. A good cop, bad cop, just sort of grinding down the Cubans, always leaving the door open for an unwavering deal, but also the heavy hand of the US military right here on the doorstep, or off the coast rather, waiting to strike if necessary. A 2025 recording here. We've got the State Department reissued the Cuba restricted list. It again restricted transactions with listed state, military, intelligence, security-linked entities. There was a company here called Orbit SA, was added effective March 10th. Like we spoke about with Mexico and Venezuela, Cuba, like every other country, is dependent on trading partners. Not only trading partners, but financial partners as well for their capital accounts. So you have the balance of payments, which is an economic statistic. It's the accumulation of the current account, the financial account, and the capital account. The current account is the net trade balance and the income from investments and remittances. And so this is the way that Cuba brings in money and goods into their country, primarily from Mexico, Venezuela, but let's also not forget China. China is a backer of the Cuban regime, and so is Russia. Two communist countries. Don't forget, the leader of Russia and all the leaders of Russia were all former KGB. Don't forget KGB. And of course, China is a Marxist communist country. So this is why it is so important for the regional security of the United States with the Monroe Doctrine 2.0 to make sure that Cuba, as well as Mexico and Venezuela, and the entirety of Latin America is cleaned up, Central America, Southern America, for the regional security interests of the United States. It is inappropriate, especially going deep into the 21st century, that such a hostile, ideologically hostile country would provide an outpost for Russia and China off the doorstep of the United States, particularly listening posts to communications coming out of the United States, confidential, classified satellite launches, different trade routes, and export and import information. It's intolerable for the United States to accept this in the 21st century. I wanted to go back to the LLM on the right-hand side. The response JSON here is given in, as we asked for in the prompt, the chronological order of events. And earlier in the video, I'd just been randomly going around to different nodes on the map, showing the functions of the different nodes, the different drawing tools, and how you can represent data on the map. But it's important because this is an educational video on the particular relations between the United States and Cuba. I did want to go through each node individually so we can get a clear understanding of the chronological order, where we are, how we got here, and give you some insight into where we're going. So if we start at the top, we've got the 2017 policy reversal from the Trump administration. I'd mentioned previously that it seems as though from an outside perspective that the Democrat-Republican divide is a good cop, bad cop divide on the United States of Cuba. And it's this balancing act that we increasingly see the United States taking in all of world events and geopolitics, where you have the United States looking at its position in the world in the future as not necessarily the unilateral power. And I'm not saying that I personally agree with this, but I'm saying this is the perspective and the impression that we get from the outside, is that the United States is increasingly becoming the balancing hand of two different power factions, two different geopolitical groups that occupy the world today. And that's what you're seeing with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party playing good cop, bad cop with the country of Cuba, but also with regards to the Middle East, with the two different factions in the Middle East, Israel, UAE, Greece, and then the other faction in the Middle East, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and making sure that balance is really in the hands of the United States to determine its future. Okay, so beginning in 2017, we know the Obama administration was soft on Cuba. Trump's first administration replaced Obama era engagement with NSPM5, I'm not sure what that is, which restrict dealings with the Cuban military security-linked entities and retighten travel rules. So this is from the State Department. And remember, this is from the AI from our prompt. And it is represented on the map as a node. It's got a latitude and longitude. And it is one of these nodes. I believe it's one of these ones up here, up in Washington. We can hover over. This is a China objective. The green one is a 2022. And the red ones here, it's in the red ones. If we scroll down now to the next economic, or I should say political action that was taken by the United States, it was 2 years later in 2019, the legal economic pressures. Washington activated Title III, Libertad, the Libertad Act, lawsuits over confiscated property, expanding litigation risk for foreign firms operating in Cuba. 2019, so that's 2 years later. That's a geo-economic policy that is putting pressure on the Cubans. Scrolling down now, again in 2019, there's travel restrictions. The administration curtailed group people-to-people travel, banned cruise ship travel, limited flights beyond Havana, and later capped family remittances. So they don't want American Cubans taking their money and sending it back to Cuba. They want to strangle, that is the United States. Geo-economic policy wants to strangle Cuba financially to bring them to heel. That was 2019. Okay, moving on to 2020 now. This could be the Trump or Biden administration. The Trump administration, I should say. Lodging restrictions. A Cuba prohibited accommodation list barred, we covered this, with US travelers from listed properties tied to the Cuban government, military, or security services. And that was represented on the node here in Havana, because remember, the prior policy that was delivered by the United States restricted the United States travelers to only traveling to Havana. And now, a few months later, or a year later in 2020, we're seeing that the Trump administration is limiting the hotels that you can stay at, particularly in Cuba. They're worried about compromise and spying. I might actually represent in text on the MapBoard here. I'll represent a text box and I'll say Havana. And as you can see, a nice little feature of the program I'm using, which is MapBoard, that I can write that little text box there on the map to get that visualization. Moving on to later in the year in 2020, or I should say 2021 now, January. So this will be the end of the Trump administration, it says here. January 2021, it's the 11th of January. At the end of Trump's first term, the US re-designated Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, triggering associated financial and compliance restrictions. A very bold move by the United States, particularly the Trump administration. Now, this is a Trump administration policy, but remember, 2021 January, he's in his last week of office. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the handover is the 20th of January to the next administration, the Democrat administration. And Biden was the winner of that administration. Make note of this because I believe in 2025 January, the Biden administration did the inverse of this, where instead of tightening sanctions at the end of their term, they actually loosened the policy towards Cuba. So you are seeing that push and pull, that good cop, bad cop, and a point of conflict between the two different administrations. So redesignating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism is an incredibly significant escalation between the two countries. But like I said, can be reversed quite quickly at the diplomatic level with the new administration coming in only a week later. Moving on to the next event, 2021, after July, the 2021 protests, the Biden administration sanctioned Cuban security entities and officials, imposed visa restrictions over repression. So you are seeing the Biden administration continue the weight and force of the Trump administration, the pressure campaign onto Cuba, by placing more sanctions on the country for these protests that have gone on in Cuba. A cynical mind could say that the US diplomatic corps or security services were prompting a domestic uprising in Cuba instead of having to use a military force, as represented here by the ships on the map. They were stoking, I think rightly so, I think it's justified, but a cynical mind could say that this is another pressure campaign by the United States to at least support and capitalize on the domestic protests in Cuba. So that was 2021 July. That has a latitude and longitude on the map as well, represented by these nodes here, one of these nodes. Carrying on to the next occurrence. This is 2022. Partial re-engagement expanded Havana immigrant visa processing and authorized more support for Cuba private enterprise and internet access. Very interesting. 2022, this is the Biden administration, saw that the Cuban protests and the financial sanctions did not work in collapsing the Cuban regime, the government, the communist government of Cuba. So it does look here like, according to this diplomatic process that they were doing, it looks like they were easing sanctions, restrictions on the Cubans. Maybe to bring them to the table, negotiate, and see if they're willing to make a change or reform their country. That was 2022, the expanded Havana immigration visa processing. Carrying on now to the next object, it's 2025. So 3 years later, nothing has really changed. This is very interesting. This is January 20th, the very last day in office of the Biden administration in 2025, right before Trump puts his hand on the Bible and takes control of the US executive branch. The Biden actions reversed. On Inauguration Day, this is Trump's, this is not the last day of the Biden administration. This is the first day of the Trump administration. So I correct myself. This is Donald Trump taking action as soon as he gets into office. On Inauguration Day, Trump reversed Biden's 2019 January steps toward rescinding Cuban terrorism designation, removing the Cuba restricted list, and pausing Title III suits. Very interesting. Let's read that again. Biden actions reversed. On Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2025, Trump reversed Biden's January 14 steps towards rescinding Cuba's terrorism designation, removing the Cuba restricted list, and pausing Title III suits. So a diplomatic escalation. The Biden administration was rescinding Cuba's terrorism designation. Trump came in the first day, the first minute, the first hour of his administration and reversed that, putting on the pressure from the United States towards Cuba at the diplomatic level. Okay, moving on to the next event. This is March 10th, 2025. The Trump administration is in its third month. Restricted list restored. The State Department reissued the Cuba restricted list. It again restricted transactions with listed state, military, intelligence, and security-linked entities. Orbit SA, which is a public company, or is a proprietary company, was added effective March 10th. So the Trump administration is implementing further financial sanctions in 2025. Carrying on to the next object, in June 2025, there are entry restrictions. So we're seeing further escalation by the Trump administration. A June 4th proclamation partially suspend or limited entry for Cuban nationals in specified immigrant and non-immigrant visa categories, subject to expectations and waivers. A June 4th proclamation partially suspend or limited entry for Cuban nationals in specified immigrant and non-immigrant visa categories. Very interesting. Carrying on to the next object, June 30th, 2025, NSPM pressure campaign. Trump's Cuba memorandum prohibited direct or indirect financial transactions benefiting military-linked entities such as GAESA, enforced the tourism ban, and ordered travel record audits. It also called for support to independent enterprise, internet access, press, and association. And we're seeing that represented here on the map up here in Washington, the different policies that have been taken out and their objects. On the right-hand side, you can see this is a 2022 object. This is a policy object of China and the United States. Carrying on to the next event that took place. Policy objective. There's been a China claim from the United States. Official text describe goals of peaceful change, democracy, rights, and independent private sector. Executive Order 14380 cites Cuba's alignment with the PRC and other U.S. adversaries. It does not publicly announce a U.S. military regime change operation or a defined China pivot program. So the United States, through an executive order, describes the goals of peaceful change, democracy, rights, and an independent private sector for Cuba. The executive order then cites Cuba's alignment with the PRC and other U.S. adversaries. They're talking about Russia. It does not publicly announce a U.S. military regime change operation or a defined China pivot program. So the United States is acknowledging the relationship between Cuba and China. And I'll represent that here on the map. Go down through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific, into China. And of course, up here into Vladivostok, into Russia. And of course, into North Korea. This is the rat lines, the tunnels for Cuba. Okay, moving on to the next object. 2026, the first month. Visa bond pressures. Otherwise eligible B1, B2 applicants may be required to post a $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 bond. So just increasing the friction for Cubans seeking visas in the United States. Moving on to the next situation, 2026, oil lifeline targeted. The administration's wider Cuba pressure campaign treated external oil supply as a leverage point. CRS reported Venezuela had long been Cuba's primary supplier, that Cuban oil imports from Venezuela were halted in January 2026. And this comes after the discussed Venezuela campaign by the United States. It's represented here in the dashed line as a route, a supply route for the Cubans from Venezuela. And remember as well, we've got the same supply route coming in from the west, which is from Mexico. And that's represented here. Cuba is getting its oil from Venezuela and Mexico. And the Trump administration has completely ceased those operations, squeezing Cuba, really putting the geo-economic pressure on Cuba. Once again, presenting Cuba with the choice between reform, radical reform from the Chinese and Russian led world order towards an open market, free Western world order. Carrying on now to the 29th of January 2026, there's a secondary tariff threat. Executive Order 14380 declared a national emergency and created a process for additional U.S. tariffs on imports from countries determined to directly or indirectly to provide oil to Cuba. CRS identified Mexico as a major 2025 supplier. The order authorized rather than automatically imposes tariffs. So we covered this earlier in the video, that the United States, with the executive order, was not directly putting tariffs on Mexico or Venezuela or any other country that's supplying Cuba with oil, but it does legally allow the United States to do so. So it is a tool in the toolbox that the United States, the Trump administration, can use to pressure Mexico into playing ball with the United States and coalescing, aligning to put pressure on the Cuban government. Carrying on now, that seems to be the final node on the map, the final geopolitical situation event. If we look further down here, we can see all of the different pressure points that have been placed on the map through the response JSON that we got. Okay, so just to recap, what we've got here is we're using a free software called MapBoard. And what MapBoard does is it allows us to draw and edit over the world map, to treat each country as an individual object, that is to create different properties within the country, to color and edit and customize the country the way we like, as you can see with the United States here, to draw over the map, to create supply routes, to represent the movement of people, flags, military assets, conflict zones. A great way for content creators, analysts, and educators, and even hobbyists to be able to understand what is going on in the world and present a clear and articulate argument for what they wish or desire to happen as well. This doesn't have to be used just for current events. Using the current context of the map as it exists, as you've created it, you can analyze historical events as well. I mentioned earlier in the video that you could analyze and visualize the US Civil War or the US-Mexico War, or many different, the War of Independence, many different historical events that have taken place, not only with America, but for British-occupied India, for the Cold War, all of Europe, and as I have done in previous videos, as of late, the Russia-Ukraine war and the US-Iran Strait of Hormuz situation that's going on. So this has been the video on the US-Cuba relations. It was just a video. The goal of the video was to inform you, the viewer, on a general idea of what's going on from an open source civilian perspective, but to also show clearly the different tools that are available to you using artificial intelligence, using map representation and visualization, and to learn from current events and different objects on the map on what's going on in the world. So I hope that was insightful. If you want to download and use this program, like I said, it's free. The link's in the description below. It's on my GitHub. I created it for this very purpose. And thank you very much for listening.